relationship to or how did you see this movie's relationship to those movies? Where did you want to kind of follow that tradition, and where did you want to go off in your own new directions?
Well, I mean, the film is what it is. I mean, the echoes of those things are kind of just part of the flavors of it, you know. And so it was never a sort of subconscious attempt to make a 70s style movie, but just like, you know, the material just feels like it kind of, you know, it has echoes with that period of paranoia, particularly kind of like early 70s, but you know, sort of post-Watergate and you know, the end of the sort of, you know, hippie dream or whatever, and there's, you know, and it's sort of, I guess also probably drugs as well, you know, the paranoia is all sort of all part of it, but it feels like this I'm hoping this film is like a contemporary film and plays to the reality of now, but has echoes of that, also has echoes of you know, classic film noir as well, you know, Lily's character is a sort of femme fatale, and there's, you know, it's sort of, you know, there's bits of Hitchcock in there. There's, you know, there's other stuff there as well, you know. But yeah, it feels like, you know, leading into that. You know, it was part of what made the thing attractive, I guess, in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, that word paranoia. I mean, one of the things I love about this movie is you create such a like palpable sense of dread and paranoia, in the sense that like everybody, you know, at any point they're not safe. Like they could be being watched by somebody. There's nowhere to hide. All that kind of stuff. What kinds of conversations did you have with your collaborators, like your cinematographer and your production designer, about how to kind of visually create that sense of paranoia and dread?
Well, I mean, the very first thing was the idea of making a New York film and shooting it in New York, not in Toronto or anywhere else, you know, and trying to kind of lean into the city and the idea of someone occupying, you know, living in the shadows of that city. So the, you know, location scouting, and you know, which you know, Jane Lusky, production designer, you know, very much a native New Yorker, and you know, done a lot of stuff. So leaning in with, you know, with her on that. Giles, the cinematographer, who I've worked with on 9 films now, you know, we have a very kind of close shorthand, and so we were trying to kind of work out how to kind of capture the flavors of brooding camera moves that are very slow, and then different energies, and obviously editorially as well. There's a lot of things, you know, that because Riz's character and Lily's character are very rarely in the same room together, the same space together, until the end of the film. How to create this kind of budding relationship between them, you know, while then, you know, they're never actually there. Obviously, we rehearsed together, so you know, we knew the shapes, but trying to kind of put that all together cinematically when it's dislocated and it's often, you know, being communicated through a third party, it's hard. You know, you're sort of taking a leap of faith to some extent.
Well, that's something that really impressed me about the movie, was that I was really, before we find out, you know, Lily's true nature, you know, I was really rooting for the two of them together, and there's so much chemistry between the two of them. And like you say, I realized after the movie, I was like, they barely are ever on screen. They don't even really talk to each other on the phone because of the relay thing. And how did you work with the actors to kind of create that sense of chemistry? You mentioned that you had rehearsals. Like, what did that rehearsal period consist of?
Well, you're trying to understand what that was and what the games of the game that Lily was playing, you know, and her awareness about how, you know, like she's deliberately chosen the kind of goldfish bowl to be in, and that she's playing to him. Although obviously we don't want to tell that part of the story until we reveal it. And with Riz, it's, you know, you know, his sort of his strength is his solitude, and his weakness is his loneliness, and in a way, and so working on that, working on the kind of the detail of how he's worked out how to sort of not leave a digital footprint and you know, keep below the radar in this day and age where you're, you know, infinitely trackable as soon as you start dipping into that world.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the whole thing of, you know, surprising the audience with Lily's character, I'm curious how much trial and error there was in the editing in figuring out when and how to reveal information, because I feel like you did a really good job of not tipping it. I mean, like, I didn't see it coming, but it's like, I would assume it's tough to kind of calibrate that balance where it's like you're not letting the audience get ahead of you, but you also don't want to confuse them.
But what's interesting is when the first iteration of the script, you know, if you were to watch it a second time, you'd feel like you'd been cheated, and it was really important to me not to do that, so that there are actually, if you want to watch it a stood up on a second viewing, and that you still get something out of it, even though you know what that game is. So that was a big part of it. What was, I can't remember what the question was. Sorry.
Yeah, it was just kind of about like just the challenge in editing of sort of striking that balance of like how and when you reveal information, and you know.
But it's always a sort of sliding scale, isn't it? You try too little and you try too much, and then you work out where feels the right thing. So it was a complex edit because there's a lot of scenes and a lot of, as I said, the relationship is kind of constructed editorially. So I worked with a new editor, Matt Mayer, who I've just done another movie with, and it was really important to me that the editing was always a bit jagged and that you were kind of moving it, in a slightly unsettled way. We talked about how to create that paranoia. That happens a little bit with that. So yeah, the construction of the film, obviously is made of before you shoot, during the shoot, and at the end. But there's definitely a lot of editorial in there.
Well, and given that you were in the editing room, you've been working with this movie for years. How do you get a sense of whether you're hitting that right balance on that sliding scale? Like, are you showing the movie to people while to get a fresh perspective?
The sort of the usual process is to show it to kind of friends and all and family, as it were, and then to put it out to test audiences and have that experience to kind of get a sense of how people are reading it, and then refine it, and then really show it to people, and actually kind of we premiered in Toronto last year, and there was a couple of things towards the end that I wasn't quite comfortable with, so we went back in and did a little bit of re-editing, having kind of already put it out into a public audience, and I'm really pleased we did. I think it's very, very subtle. I think the flavor of it is better as a result.
One of the things I always love about your movies, and this one's no exception, is I love the sense of detail, whatever world you're getting into, and here just like the details of whistleblowing and just like how one does that, how they get paid, if they're not whistleblowing, like all that stuff is so interesting, and so I just absolutely loved it. What kind of research did you do into that world?
Well, we did quite a lot of research. We met remotely, because we didn't, that's what world we live in now, but we met quite a few former whistleblowers, or I guess you never are a former whistleblower, you're just a whistleblower, and talked to them, some of whom had made a lot of money out of it, because you get, if there's a corporate fine, you get a percentage of it, some of whom were just doing it for the reasons they did it, and it was always really, really interesting, and I think nobody whistleblowers without being scarred by the process. You're usually shunned by your colleagues and friends, and you probably often have to move. You question whether what you did was the right thing or not, because after the initial hoo-ha, it dies away and tends to be forgotten about. And the people that choose to whistleblow seem to be a particular type of person who sort of grapple with their morality and they can't let it go. I mean, most people probably just go, well, this is too much for me, and turn their back and pretend they haven't seen what they've seen. It takes a certain type of person to do that, and I have the greatest respect and admiration for them, but I do feel like they've made a great sacrifice, and often their lives are not improved by it.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of feel that in the fabric of the movie, like there's this haunted quality, not just to like Riz's character, but to the guy who we meet in the opening scene, and all that, and yet, like the movie, another interesting thing about it is totally, it's got this kind of haunting, sad quality, but it's also, again, very suspenseful thriller, and it's also kind of, there's a little bit of a sense of humor to it with the Sam Worthington character and Will Fitzgerald, and you were telling me earlier that was something that you had to kind of play with to calibrate, what was your philosophy about where to find the right tonal balance, and how much comedy was enough or too much?
Because as a director, I do an awful lot of improvising, so we're always, I'm never looking for the same, scene done the same way twice, So I'm sort of exploring, with whatever the allocated time to shoot the scene, I'm trying to explore it from multiple different ways, using the same ingredients, but just seeing what it goes. So the editorial choices are great. With those guys, we showed a lot of stuff that was really good, but it was funny. and in the early cuts, we showed it, and it just felt like they were not being taken as serious as they could be because they were funny, and so I had to cut, really good material, had to just choose to put that on the cutting room floor so that it didn't undermine their cause in a way, and that's an interesting thing you learn, particularly when you are throwing a lot to the wind with improvisation. You're sort of just having to sort of see what fits and see what doesn't, and adjust accordingly.
Something in the movie that I think feels simple to the audience, but I'm guessing was not simple for you as a filmmaker, is just shooting all of those phone conversations and those relay conversations. I mean, that's like something that I would think is a challenge to like get those rhythms right and to keep it interesting when there's so many of them. How did you approach the way you shot and edited those scenes?
Well, it's interesting. In the first iteration of the script, they didn't really have personalities. They were just voices, and it was the first thing I said, well, we should see them. Not only because it'd be great to kind of give them characters, but also because it does give you editorial opportunities, and so that became kind of part of the flavor. And the casting of them, I wanted to choose a huge variety of sort of types in a way, so that you kind of whatever somebody's trying to type or someone's trying to say that's being relayed, they got their own lives, they're just reading the text, and I made sure the actors didn't really know the text until the day, so that they were just effectively reading it. So someone's got an important piece of information to deliver, but they're delivering it casually, or somebody's got a tender piece of information to deliver, and they're reading it in a slightly irritated way, and then there are times where you wanted them to be on target to, because that information was really important. So I just had a sort of pack of cards and sort of worked out who was going to say what, when. And it was one of the scariest days of the shoot. It was 25 pages of dialogue that we had to shoot in one day. I was like, I'm never going to do this. So we got through it in a really good way, and they were great. They just really embraced it as a group of people. We had the night shift and the day shift, and we just did it. And I think they're a really important part of the flavor of the film.
Well, shooting 25 pages in one day speaks to another question I have, which is, this movie feels big. I mean, again, it feels like a sort of 70s Sidney Pollack movie or something. But I know you didn't have a huge amount of time to shoot it in. So what are some of the ways that you found to maximize your resources, to maximize your time and money so that you can kind of not feel like you're straining against the resources?
We had a 27-day shoot, which is not a lot for 300 scenes, but I was able to get a 3-day pre-shoot where we sort of did a run and gun stuff in the city. So a lot of the flavors of the streets are kind of, the smaller scenes that we shot around the place that were done in those first 3 days in a real hurry. Which is, I like the energy of shooting fast, so that's cool. But it was tight. But those first 3 days really gave us a huge kind of sort of backbone of New York that we could lean on for the rest of the shoot, because half of it was shot over half of it was shot in New Jersey. And hopefully that doesn't, it feels like a New York film. I want to see it as New York Airport, where Riz's kind of layer is just below New York Penn. So there are reasons to be there. But yeah, that was a balance to get that right.
And another thing that is really cool about this movie is, the first time I watched it, I saw it with my wife, and when Riz speaks, she leaned over to me and whispered to me, she's like, "Is that the first time he's talked to Lily?" And we realized, oh my God, it's like 30 or 45 minutes or something for you to hear his voice. In a movie like this where there is that kind of situation, how important are music and sound design to kind of set the mood and express character and tell a story?
Well, I think they're really important, but the music was something. Every needle drop in his character's a record collector in a way, and there was a bigger part of that when we shot it, and it got cut down for the story. But so I just wanted to have some quite obscure kind of needle drop tracks in there, and so I've been gathering them for 2 or 3 years before we started shooting, and then basically every track that was in the movie there is something that I had that I sort of gathered a playlist of before we shot. So it's kind of great to be able to lean on that. And then the other music is kind of like a bit more sonic. I've worked with the same composer on 4 films, and we try and do stuff that's it's musical, but it's just more washes of sound and those sort of things. So that is kind of almost bordering into sound design. And yeah, I think there's the solid flavors of the film are super important.
Now, you mentioned that you improvise a lot and you like to let the actors try different things. How, like how much do you pre-plan what you're going to shoot? I mean, are you the kind of director like who storyboards and shots and all that kind of stuff, or is it more about just responding on the day to what you're seeing in front of you?
I made a short film many years ago where I storyboarded every single shot, and it was like it was boring to me. So it was like, okay, we've done that, we've done that, we've done that, and after that I've never really. I mean, if I've got a stunt sequence, I'll maybe do some boards or something just to help communicate. But normally, I mean, I've got a very clear idea in my head of what I'm after. But I like to keep things loose enough so that you can take opportunities on the day. So that it's not that for example, the scene in the concert hall, which has kind of got structured almost like a Hitchcock film or whatever, but that was just very instinctive, it just kind of it came, just understanding what those angles are and working through it. So yeah, I really don't storyboard unless it's a very small scene that requires kind of like precision for safety or whatever.
I'm also curious, just as a fan of yours, another thing I really admire about you is that your movies are so different. I mean, this movie is very different from Hell or High Water, which is very different from, I mean, they're Young Adam. I mean, they're very different. You're not the kind of director who necessarily repeats genres, and you kind of adapt your style to the story. I'm just curious, like, what motivates your choices? I mean, is it purely kind of instinctive deciding what movies to do? Is it about, is it about doing something that's different from what
I
you
think
just
some of it's about doing some of it not treading the same ground, and also feeling like whatever the film you're going to make is it's not just a subject matter. It's the kind of the process of making it. It can be different. You can explore different ways of doing it and be creative, because you can get kind of caught in the mechanism of making films. They can start to feel like drudgery in a way. So trying to kind of like adjust the methodology to suit the project is definitely part of what I'm thinking about when I'm reading new material. And so it's something that speaks to me, something that feels like it's within my realms of capability, and that just sort of it has a fresh appeal. So I mean, most film directors don't make the same film twice, but people often say that to me, and I really don't make the same anything. They're all very different. Which I guess is a good thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing you movies do have in common is you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation how you didn't want the movie to feel like a throwback. You wanted it to feel contemporary, and it's engaging with contemporary issues. And your movies do a really good job of they're sort of in these genres. Like Hell or High Water is another example. It's a genre film, but it's very much like this kind of capsule of like a cultural moment. And I feel like you do a really good job of doing that in a way that's not hitting the audience over the head, but it's very clear. And I'm curious what your philosophy is about that, just in terms of like where you see that kind of line between entertainment and kind of socio-political commentary.
Well, it's kind of, I keep trying to kind of like straddle that gap between being, in some way audience friendly and doing stuff that's interesting, and trying to find sort of like a little part of me still in the art house, which is sort of where I guess I come from, and the other part trying to do bigger stuff and play with genres and things like that, and that the hope is that you can do both at the same time, and you can make sophisticated films that are also entertaining.
Well, I think we've got time. Do we have time for one or two audience questions? Okay, sure. Does anybody in the audience have any questions before you? Yeah, up there in the back.
Hi. How did you direct the two actors when they were interacting in terms of like their performance, and were they interacting in any way beyond like were they? I'm sure they obviously were on the same set, but just how did you direct them to interact with each other?
I have to warn you that I am very hard at hearing, so he's going to have to repeat the question.
And is your question about the directing them in like the relay conversations, or yeah? His question is about how you directed the two lead actors in those conversations where they're doing the relay calls?
Well, it was like, with Riz, it was different because he was basically kind of, you know, typing onto a machine. So it was about trying to sort of get him to feel what he was trying to communicate, but knowing what he's doing, and you know, him you know, obviously in his own apartment, that's a different game to when he's having to pull it out on the street and you know, having to interact. But so for him, he was really just like, it was like a single person, you know, typing stuff into a thing and emoting the emotions he was feeling, and so that was a very, very direct thing. For Lily, you know, almost all of her communication, well, you know, certainly for the first half of the film, was she's in her apartment. So we had a very concentrated period of her in her apartment, and I had an actor read the lines off to help her, but it was hard. She was kind of, but it also, part of the character is knowing that she's playing that game. You know, her name was Sarah, but her real name was Erin, and I mean, kind of going like, okay, for this scene, you know, like, keep 5% of Erin in there, or let's have 20% of Erin. So you're looking over your shoulder. You're aware of the fact that you're playing this game. So it was about getting the balance of the real her versus the front that she's putting on, and that, you know, but the great thing for a director, you know, having a one-to-one relationship with an actor just in the scene is that you're totally focused on that thing. So it was kind of pleasurable, but they're kind of there. They're both reaching out into the void when they're doing it.
Up way back.
First I wanted to comment saying that I loved all the juxtaposition that was added into the movie, like the paranoia, but also being astute, and him being kind of like a rookie, but at the same time very knowledgeable. One of the themes that I really liked is like the idea behind masculinity, because I know with a lot of thriller movies, it often is like very adrenaline draining and like a very like archetype of like very strong and like almost violent sometimes. But I feel like the choice of like a person of color especially and having vulnerable moments in the movie was really nice. So I wanted to know if that was intentional or if it was because of one of the iterations. If I could have more information about that.
So the question is about casting Riz Ahmed and casting a person of color, and also like sort of playing with the idea of like masculinity in terms of like him as an action hero.
Well, it was interesting because the original script had someone who was I think they were of Hungarian ancestry. That was about it. But when I decided that I wanted to work with Riz, and I've been wanting to work with Riz for a while, it was really great for us to be able to lean into his character and to explore. Like, for example, he's one of his disguises or the way he gets about is pretending to be a delivery cyclist, you know, and the idea of sort of being a brown person hiding in the city and becoming invisible was something that was really important to the nature of the thing, and then obviously as we developed it with his character and the roots to his alcoholism and the roots to his whistleblowing, all that you know, that those things became, you know, his ethnicity, as it were, became a major part of it. But it wasn't, you know, it wasn't written as that. We just evolved that when I you know, chose Riz to be the lead.
Well, we've got another movie coming in here, so I'm gonna wrap this up. But I want to thank you for coming and talking with us, David.